Well, hello again, class, and welcome once again to Unit 4. So it's Tuesday, and you are hopefully a couple of days into your reading for this week, for this unit. I know we have a good amount of ground to cover, lots of really, I would say, important content. So primarily we're looking at career counseling in a global economy and career issues for a diverse workforce. So this is probably, from a content perspective, one of, well, I say this all the time. I say that all weeks are my favorite weeks. But I really do love the content that we're going to explore this week. I think it's important, as of course, all the content is going to be important. But I love what we're looking at this week. So we're going to look at a number of questions that are really important. So, one of the things to keep in mind, here we are in 2017. Now, I remember when I was, back in 2000, let's see, 2008, my wife and I moved out to Colorado Springs. And if you remember 2008, that was when the economy really tanked. But, all the different bubbles were bursting and everybody was losing work and so forth. So I moved out to the Colorado Springs to start a graduate program for Azusa Pacific University, and our target audience that we were kind of pursuing, if you will, to be our target student population were individuals that worked for or out of or in the field of nonprofit work there in Colorado Springs. So if you know much about the lay of the land, I think it's still the case today, but there are about 1,800 nonprofit organizations in the city of Colorado Springs alone. So there's about 600,000 people population, and of that population, like I said, about 1,800 nonprofits that obviously employs a significant number of people. So of those 1,800 nonprofits, about 600, so a third of them were faith-based institutions. And of those 600, so of that one third, about 450 of them were churches. Now you can imagine, as the economy is tanking, things are going south everywhere you can possibly think to look. If for-profit organizations don't have money, which we're seeing layoffs happen left and right, it's even more rare that we would have nonprofits having money. In fact, we recruited a student that worked at Compassion International, if you're familiar with their work out there, with child sponsorship programs. And he was an individual from Guatemala who was a permanent resident here in the States, and he was wanting to pursue a degree in at the time what was organizational leadership. And so they had about 1,000 employees or so, maybe 800 or 900, somewhere pushing 1,000 at the institution there in Colorado Springs. And they used to have a very, I guess you could even say, liberal approach to funding graduate education and even an undergraduate education for their employees. Well, when we moved out there and the economy was doing so poorly, he was, out of this almost 1,000 person organization, at least that which was right there in Colorado Springs, he was the only person given approval for funding to pursue a graduate degree. So things were challenging. I had a job, so I was grateful for that. But you can imagine that they were tough. So when we talk about the Great Recession here in the first couple of questions, we look at some of these significant challenges that occurred. And so something that for you to think about, although we're looking at almost a full decade ago, I think it's fair to say that we're still dealing with some of the ramifications and fallout from what we experienced way back then. So there are folks that will tell us that we're in recovery and we have been for so long. And at the same time, I think that, when you look at the everyday person on the street, there's going to be some individuals that would say, I don't know if we are fully recovered. And we may try to have an appearance like we're fully recovered, but my question would be, are we actually fully recovered? And did we ever fully recover? That's the question. So, are we just kind of covering things up with Band-Aids? And so if you think back then, I think that a lot of us can think about then. We can think about family members, parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, neighbors, people that were significantly affected and impacted, and I would say in some pretty significant negative ways when the Great Recession took place. Now, the other thing that I would ask about is maybe when these things occurred, did you have any sort of positive experiences that came out of this psychological recession, as Bardwick is referring to it as. So think about those questions. These are important, and there's things that are, they're with us all the time. They're things that affect not just our career well-being. I guess you could say, in addition to our career well-being, they affect our financial well-being. They affect our psychological well-being. And so, if you were to think back, almost a decade ago now, if you were to be in the field, maybe some of you were, and you're back here just taking this one class to be grandfathered into the LPC. Maybe you saw some clients, or you knew of individuals that were seeing clients that were really struggling from a psychological, a mental well-being perspective, given some of the challenges that they were experiencing with the Great Recession, the psychological recession, and kind of the implications that came with that. So important things to think about, and if you kind of follow the economy, the interesting reality is that we typically see these kind of peaks and valleys, if you will. It's like almost some would say a 7-year cycle. And so, given that we crashed, really hard, the hardest that we've seen since the Great Recession in 2008, some would have speculated that next crash was coming in 2015. So from a 7-year standpoint, really it started in 2007, kind of continued on probably through 2009. Did we see it again in 15, 16? And many of us, I think, would probably say we did. And they were seeing things from a different form of recession or challenging financial reality. So talk about the experiences that you've had. One of the things I think that's both helpful and challenging in a class like this, and really probably in a program like the one that you are fully enrolled in, is that you do have to kind of dig deep and answer some of those more challenging questions that actually cause for you to talk about the hard things. And so, I think that as we are working with clients and asking them those questions, I think what a better way to model that than answering those questions ourselves. So I'd love to hear from you on that. So we continue on, and there's some other questions about family background. So we even touched on some of these elements in my previous video about kind of multiculturalism as it relates to well-being. So think about kind of your background. So your family, maybe immigration, culture, socioeconomic status, gender, sibling position, family roles, and so forth. In what ways might your personal background affect your viewpoints and this is important for all of us to at least acknowledge, create potential bias when working with clients in a career counseling relationship? Keep in mind the issue of diversity discussed in Chapter 7 when you're answering these things. So these are important. There's a couple of articles in here for you to read. So there's one by Byers, Winston, and Fuad titled Metacognition and Multicultural Competence. So this is something just for you to kind of read for additional reading. If for some reason the link does not work for you, it worked for me, but if it doesn't work for you, let me know and I'll make sure that I get that document to you. So it's hard on my end to see how you see things here. Additionally, you'll read an article or at least a portion of a book. So there's a book that Malcolm Gladwell wrote called Blink. And unfortunately, the PDF that I have uploaded is going to be sideways. Okay, so you'll open that up, and I would encourage you to just open it up and then print it. So you can print the documents, and then you can just kind of turn them, obviously, from a landscape, and turn them so you can read them more easily in that. It's a very important section of Blink from Malcolm Gladwell that talks a lot about gender bias and how we still have issues of sexism within and gender bias within the workforce, and some stories that happened not too long ago. And I'm sure that if we had an opportunity and time to do so, we could probably go on the list and talk about all of the different experiences that we potentially have had, or people that we know have had with some of these similar elements. So again, if that doesn't come up for you for some reason, let me know and I'll get that to you. You can also see there's a link to it at the bottom of the forum for you to cover. All right. And then lastly, I have a TED Talk that I would love for you to watch from Dan Ariely. So, and again, if it doesn't show up in your browser, there is a link that you can just click on. It takes you to the YouTube, and I would love for you to watch that. So it's a great talk. Asking this question, are we in control of our decisions? So it's just something to think about. I'm not trying to have any sort of is someone pulling, the purse strings or whatever, but just some things to think about and all the different elements that kind of play into our decisions and how that works, okay? So lots to cover this week in our discussions, and obviously you have a number of other elements of things to cover in your unit here in Unit 4. So as you're working through your form, remember that your posts will be made by Wednesday, even though we had a bit of a delay with that day off. That's kind of both the blessing and the curse of an online class, is you can work on your own time, but also when you have these different holidays, if you will, it's not you're not meeting once a week, so you have time to get that all done. So we're still going to have the Wednesday at midnight deadline. Okay, so you have your unit forum discussion, and then you have case studies number 5 and 6, and you'll be spending time in chapters 6 and 7 in Anderson and Vandehee, and of course you'll continue your vocation and calling reading. If you have not done so yet, make sure that you get into the forums, and there's a couple of questions in there, several questions I should say, asking you about what book it is that you have chosen to read for the vocation and calling assignment. I'd love to hear from you, and I'm sure that your classmates would as well. So once again, lots to cover this week. I am just thoroughly enjoying the discussions that are going on, looking at your tremendous amounts of back and forth feedback with your classmates. Really good thoughts and content, so I appreciate that. Great responses to case studies. And that's the thing that I want you to keep in mind is that when you're working on these case studies, it's important to remember that not everyone is going to answer the same way. Okay, so in fact, I think I mentioned I just completed a certification designation with the National Career Development Association. They're the leading kind of really national career development organization in America. And I had to do a number of case studies myself, and my answers may very well have been a little bit different than others, and yet they still deem them as appropriate. So you're going to think, how would I as an individual respond to these questions? Okay. All right, so let's get to this. You had a number of good questions. I want to answer one really quickly, okay? And I'm not going to be able to be as probably thorough or maybe even in depth as maybe you would want, but I think I can still get to it. So here's in a nutshell: at what point, or is there a point where a career counselor would refer a client out to an MFT, or would the counselor still work with the client through the framework of career development? And that's a great question. So probably a lot of you are asking that similar question. When would I refer to an MFT or an LPC in our case, right? So it really, I think when we feel we need to. So I never, ever, 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 ever have a problem with saying, I can't help you. And maybe I could say I can help you in an element of what you're doing, but really this is kind of outside the parameters or outside the scope of what I am trained to do. Now, here's the beauty and the benefit of what you're doing is you are being trained as an MFT or an LPCC, and so you have this incredible skill set that comes with that training, with the other 63, or in some cases, other 66 units that you'll complete to pursue your degree in licensure, and you have this one class in career. So, to do career counseling, there is no actual designation or certification that you have to complete. So you could potentially offer career counseling services as part of the work that you do, and you just are going to fall back on your MFT training. Or if you wanted to keep things separate and you said, I think I really love career counseling, and you wanted to do that and keep it kind of just real clean, you could potentially have a great network of folks that you referred out to when you felt that it was appropriate. So I'm referred clients from MFTs because they know that this is what I do and they know that they don't do that. So similarly, I know what I do and I know that I can't do certain things, and I'm very upfront. I tell them I am not a licensed therapist. I'm not a counselor. I am here to offer career-related services, and if there are things that I cannot handle, I am more than happy and willing, and you should expect that I would be the one that would send you out to somebody else. So it's really being sensitive to the needs of the client, and then I think it's really helpful when we're able to and willing to admit that we don't know certain things, and then you send them out. So hope that's helpful. I'll get to more questions here in the next weeks ahead. Hope you have a great Unit 4, and we will see you online.